Okay, so all of us should be aiming to get our site plans to a place where it's becoming a lot more detailed. In exercise 2, some of the deliverables specifically outlined that on the site plan you should have your section cut clearly indicated with annotations with reasoning why you chose your section in that location. Now, nobody in the class actually did this, so I wanted to show you guys this as an example of what you should be working on in the background as you go through all of these exercises. So even though this isn't a stated deliverable, having a site plan and refining the amount of detail that is on the site plan will be ongoing throughout the semester, so that ultimately when you showcase all of the exercises from this semester that you can easily pinpoint them. So for example, you're going to have about a 100-meter square box somewhere on your site along the section line, which is indicative of the topography exercise we're working on right now. So that will show up on the site somewhere. In the next 2 exercises, you'll be selecting other squares on the site. So we'll want to have a base plan where we can locate all of the main information and keep referring to it, and it should get richer over the semester. So I'm going to show you how you can get your line work kind of looking at a basic minimum up to this standard. So I exported my line work from Rhino in the previous video, but since then I just went in and I realized that I had missed some of the buildings from the background, so I've turned those on. I've also drawn in over top of my image background the boundaries of the industrial area in this orange line, and then the Trans-Canada Trail, which runs along the site on this path. So I've kind of drawn that in turquoise as it goes across the entire site. And then I've just eliminated some of the blocks that I had drawn for the figure ground, where I have detailed out these blocks in more detail. So I also brought my section line over so that I could export that, and also turned back on the contours. So now I'm going to re-export this just as a total image file, and I will do that, making sure that my layers are unlocked and I can select everything. We'll go File, Export Selected, and I'm going to just add a rev number to this so I don't save over my previous file, but it'll be an Illustrator file. It's going to be 1 meter equals 1 millimeter for 1 to 1000. And then I will go into Illustrator and open up that file. So all of these lines end up being quite far off the origin, and I'm going to select all of them and just drag this over into approximately the center of the page. And just like in all the other exercises, I'm going to change the artboard so that it suits our canvas. I'm going to leave a little bit of extra space at the bottom for title and scale bar and north arrow. Once you have placed your artboard on the page and gotten your line work into the center, you can select everything. And because everything is on their own separate layers, we don't have to worry about selecting them by appearance and moving them to their own layers. So I'm going to just give this a stroke of black, and I will make sure that my stroke is selected in the palette and just click on the black here. If you can't find it, you can always go to your swatch palette and look for it there. So now all my line work is black. I'm going to go through and turn off these layers and just work with them one by one. So this industrial area, I want it to be a boundary on my site. To make it a boundary, I could change the stroke by going up to the stroke palette here, but we have a bunch of resources that I supplied in the Illustrator palette. So let's open those up and see if there's anything that could be helpful there. There's a whole bunch of different lines and boundaries that we could copy from. I am actually just going to select everything on these swatch panel pages and Control C to copy them, and then Control V to paste them into this document. And that way they're going to be available to me as I'm working in this file. and they come in at the layer that you're working on. So I will just drag that little square up onto the top layer, and I'll just place it there for now. So again, if I'm looking at this boundary, I might want to select a line that looks like a property boundary. So I'm going to go over here and use the eyedropper tool to grab this property boundary right here. Now if I zoom out and look at the line, I can see that it has taken on the characteristics of that line, but for this scale, it's just showing up as way too small. So what I'm going to do is go into the stroke palette up here, and I'm going to quadruple these numbers. So if this is 12, I'm going to make this 48, and see where that gets us. That is looking a little bit more legible on the page, but I'm going to increase the stroke by a lot. So make it a big thick line so it's obvious on our page. Now I'm going to do the same with the Trans-Canada Trail. I will select the trail and then look for some appropriate line on this page. Use the eyedropper to grab another boundary. I think I'm going to use this arrow here. So again, I'm going to have to change the scale of this stroke. So I'm going to quadruple this. And then I'm going to make sure there's arrows on both ends. So I'm going to select an arrowhead for the end and an arrowhead for the beginning. That looks pretty good, and I'm going to make that a little bit thicker. So now we already have two different boundary lines on our site. Now the coniferous trees, I would like to distinguish those from the deciduous trees, and there are a few options over here in this trees palette. So I'm going to take one of these spiky looking trees and just copy it by pressing Alt and dragging it over. And then I'm going to change the stroke to black. I'll also change the line stroke to the line weight to 0.25. I think that will work better with the drawing. And I'm just going to cut it by doing Control X and then go over to my drawing and do a Control V. Now I'm going to drag it into place wherever my circles are, and I'm just going to use Alt and drag to copy it over. So if I turn off the coniferous trees layer, as long as I have moved these lines to a different layer, then that is all that shows up. So I will select the decks by selecting them here, and I'm going to give them a line weight of 0.5. Then I'll turn on the planting, select that, and give that a weight of 0.25. I added some light posts to my file in Rhino, and how I determined where those were located was I looked at the shadows that were being cast on the site. So wherever I saw a shadow like this, I could tell that there was a lamppost there. So I have just added in certain areas, these circles indicating that there are lampposts or utility poles along the edge of the site. So I will select those lampposts and give them a weight of 0.5. I'm not going to actually change the deciduous trees, I'm just going to change their weight down to 0.5. Now the curbs we want to stand out a little bit more, so I'm actually going to keep them at 1, just the way that they are right now. I've also drawn in the shoreline, and I want that to stand out quite a bit, so I'm going to give that a higher line weight, maybe 3 or so. Our contours, of course, we have set a line type and line weight in Rhino, but we can give those a little bit of an adjustment here. I'm just going to bring them down to, I'm actually going to make it 0.35, like that. So those are quite faded back now. And what I'm going to do is select every fifth contour and give it a thicker line weight. This just helps to differentiate and be able to read those contours a little bit better. The sidewalks, I will make those just a little bit less than the curb, so 0.75. And the green, I will take those down to 0.5. These roads up here that I've begun to draw into the industrial area, I will keep those at 1. Now the buildings, we want those to stand out on the site, so I'm going to give them a pretty high weight, maybe of 2. And then we have this section line, and I'm going to cut it down because I know that my section cut line is only about 1 kilometer long, and I've cut it partially into the water, so cut it here, and I'm just going to delete that part. I've just done that by pressing C and cutting onto the line. Now this line, we want it to be very distinctive, so I'm going to give it a very high thickness of 5, and then I'm going to go in and give it a little tick at the end. So just by drawing a line segment, and I'm going to change that to 20. And I'm just going to check to make sure that it's on this projecting cap, which has sharp corners instead of the rounded cap. That's going to make it a little bit more sharp on the page. So I'll zoom in and just move that so that it's aligned with the line. And then I'll copy it, pressing Control C, and paste it down here. Draw it back onto the line here. So now I will select all of those elements and create a group by pressing Control G. Now I want all of my annotations to sit on top of the surface of this drawing, so I'm going to create a new layer that's called Annotation, and I'm going to drag that section cut line up onto the annotation layer. I'm also going to grab that those 2 lines that we drew earlier, the Trans-Canada Trail and the industrial line, and I'm going to drag those up into the annotation layer as well. That way they can kind of float on top of the surface of the drawing. I don't think I actually need this rectangle anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. So our drawing is starting to look a little more regular and more detailed. I forgot to eliminate these property guidelines from my drawing, so I'm just going to select them and get rid of them. We need to use a clipping mask to get rid of the contour lines that are outside of the edge of our drawing. So the first thing we want to do is copy this rectangle in place. I'm going to go Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste in Place. And then I can use that and select the contours layer by pressing down Shift and clicking on this arrow. Then I can just right click and go Make Clipping Mask, and it's going to cut away all of the extra bits, but we still have this frame around our drawing. Speaking of that frame, I'm going to give it a black stroke here and also give it a stroke of 2. That layer that I had selected, it was actually the clipping mask for the contour layer, so make sure you move that down to contours and then turn it off, and then you can select the outer barrier and give that a stroke of 2. So I want to give this water layer a fill of a sort of light blue color, and I'm going to do that by turning off all of the other layers and just focusing on the water. Yeah, this layer is all there, but it hasn't been connected, so I'm just going to right click and go Join. And then I should be able to assign a fill here. You can either double click and access the color palette here, and I'm going to look for a kind of grayish blue tone like that. Eventually your whole site should be as detailed as that square that I had drawn before. So it should be around this resolution of detail with buildings, sidewalks, curb edges, and roads and trees all distincted. But until you get to that point, you can just select these other lines and give them a line weight of about 0.5. So now our site plan is looking pretty good, but there are some layer ordering issues. When we think about the layers of our drawing, we have to think about what layers need to be on the bottom and what layers need to be on the top. So I'm going to do some rearranging here. We would like our water layer to be on the bottom. That's because I want the contour lines and any other lines to read over top of that layer. So our next layer is going to be our contour layer. Then I'm going to add in the green, the planting, all of the building layers and decks and sidewalks and curbs. I'm actually going to put the curbs down here. Buildings, roads, and I can get rid of a few layers that I don't need anymore. So I don't need this, this coniferous trees layer. I don't need the industrial area and Trans-Canada Trail because I moved them to the annotations layer. And I don't need the sections cut layer because I moved that also to the annotation layer. So I'm just going to cut this path so that it suits our page, and I'm going to do that by pressing C and then just clicking over here somewhere. I'll use the selection to cut that away, and now our trail is contained within the site. With this industrial boundary, I'm just going to double check where it ends on my site compared to my line, and I guess it goes all the way to the road and then kind of jogs down. So I'm just going to complete that by using the pen tool in Illustrator. So P for pen, and I'm just going to bring it off to the other side of this road and bring it down to the shoreline. I'm going to control click to end the pen tool. I'm going to select one of these accent colors here and then press V to get back to my selection tool, select this shoreline path, and apply the green color to that line to indicate that it's a trail. So I think our drawing is getting pretty close. All we need is these annotations over top. So making sure that we're on our annotation layer, I'm going to draw an annotation using the pen tool. So press P for pen, and I'm going to start it near the shoreline here, and Illustrator will automatically kind of match the angle if it's a proper angle. So this looks like it might be a 45, and it kind of aligns with my section cut line. So I'm just going to draw a line up here and then go over like that. Now I took the previous line type that we were using before, so I'm just going to change that by selecting it again, selecting a black stroke and changing this to turn off the dashed line. I just want it to be continuous. But I would like the end to be a circle, so I'm going to choose for my arrowhead this filled circle here. That's a little bit too high for me, so I'm going to change that down to 1 or 2. Yeah, 2 looks pretty good. So now I have a lead line that I can use, and then I'm just going to use the text tool here and write a label, altered shoreline. Now this is really, really tiny, so I'm going to change this to my preferred font for this project, which is Futura, and the size will be 60, and I'm just going to expand this and see if it shows up. There we go. So I'm just going to let it live here on the edge of this lead line. And now we can copy and paste these over the site and point out the features that we want to showcase and to explain why we selected our section where we did, and pinpoint other important features on our site. So I'm going to copy this over here. I can easily turn it around just by using these arrows and switching it over to this side. And then I can lift it up higher like this if I need to. So I'm going to then copy this text by pressing down Alt and dragging it over, and call this industrial oil tanks. And I can keep adding in these annotations where I think that they suit my site. So I'll put another one probably for the Trans-Canada Trail over here. Okay, so now we have our site plan and it is pretty much there. I'm just going to move this down a little bit so that it's a little more centered on the page. And now what we need to do is add a title and a scale, our north arrow. And yeah, so I'm going to copy mine from this other drawing. This itself has been copied from the context plan that I created. So I'm going to Control C to copy it. And I'm just going to paste it here on my annotation layer. I'm going to actually put this on the drawing itself, and I'm going to use that as a scale bar for measurement, but I'm also going to write the scale down here below. So we can create a title. Maybe I'll just copy one of these to start. Always title your drawings. I'm going to call this my Trans Canada Trail site plan. Give it a location. And then I'm going to copy that down and just change it to, say, the scale, 1 to 1000. And I'm going to make this text a little bit bolder just so it stands out. The last thing we need to do is add a north arrow, and I actually realized there is one on this sheet up here that I'm going to use instead of the other one I created. So I'll copy it and paste it here. And I'm going to just size it up a bit. So the line is a bit too light, so I'm going to ungroup it and then assign some thicker line weights here. This one will be 1, and these will be 0.5. Now I can group that back together by pressing Control G. So this is beginning to look like a pretty good site plan, and I would encourage you guys to work on this whenever you're able to. Put in those refined details and detail what you can see and what you can glean from your aerial image. It will make a big difference as you work through the semester, because you won't find yourself scrambling the day or the night before a review trying to get this type of thing ready for the next day. And when we have our midterm reviews at the end of October, we're going to have a lot of external critics, and you want to be sure that they can fully understand where your site is, how it is located, and what the important elements are. So this is just a beginning, and of course you can select your own colors and your own accents and your own types of patterns that you want to use. But this is the minimum amount of information that you should be showing on your site plans as we go forward from now.